I'm coming to you tonight on behalf of a few different departments and different usages. As the city continues to host events, staff has begun exploring options for tables and chairs to use during those events. Prior to the City Hall remodel, the tables from the community room were what were utilized. But after years of use, the tables from 1995 were no longer in good condition and needed to be replaced. The cost of renting the items has been approximately $1,600 per event as we continue that shift from, the old tables to potentially acquiring new tables. And while tables and chairs are needed for various events such as Night to Unite, truck safety seminar, firearm safety, etc., the cost might not always be that $1,600, but it does add up. The $1,600 was from the cost of Night to Unite 2022. Staff is requesting approval to purchase 60 tables and 300 chairs. The quoted prices that we received ranged from $14,500 to $33,000, but staff determined that the lower quoted option would be more than sufficient for the needs of the city. The purchase is proposed to be funded through the city's lawful gambling donation, as it was determined that would be an eligible expense from the fund. But I would be happy to take any questions on the matter if you have any.
Perfect, thank you. Questions?
Just note there's limited activities that cities can use lawful gambling for, but we'd be looking at making this purchase under the activities and facilities for youth, or there is a one other item that we could look at, which was related to police and fire. So use for police and fire.
What have we used those funds for in the past?
Yeah.
We've only used the funds one other time to purchase signs for, actually twice for the Pioneer Society. We helped the Pioneer Society with some signage requests that they had, and let's go back and look if it was roofing or something else with the Pioneer Society. We're somewhat limited on the ability to use. We have quite a bit of dollars as we look at the we would look at like about 250,000 is what we were thinking when we were thinking about the city park project. So we have a decent fund balance in there. So we were looking at as part of that could be a funding mechanism for our city park project.
Right.
Oh.
So we would have quite a bit of funds for that.
I'll make a motion to approve the purchase of chairs using the charitable gambling funds.
Do we have a second?
Second.
And just to be
Any further
clear,
discussion?
it's for tables and
All those
chairs,
in favor say
the
aye.
quote is.
Sorry?
And we're talking up to 15,000.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
All good? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay. On to 10C, police officer recruitment and retention.
All right, thank you, Mayor and Council. As you know, this isn't the first time that you've had this topic in front of you. We've had a couple work sessions. We've been talking about it for about a year, but this is, I think, the first time it's on a council agenda for formal discussion and consideration.
I'm working on the slides, Matt, sorry.
Sounds good. So, really, since this is the first time that it's being considered formally at a council meeting, wanted to give a brief overview of why are we talking about this. You guys have been, I think, in the loop on the challenges with law enforcement recruitment and hiring that's been going on for a couple of years now. And there's all kinds of formal studies, but the gist of it is that there are more job openings than there are currently qualified candidates. There are more people leaving the profession than coming into it, and there's alarmingly low enrollment in the law enforcement programs and also in the graduation. So unfortunately, this is a crisis that's going to be getting worse before it gets better. We've been talking about it since 2022 internally at the city, and in 2023 is when we started actually taking more formal steps. So we started having, we stepped back in 2022 and in 2023 and looked at, well, what are other police departments doing? And what we see is, if you can go on to the next slide, Jess, that a lot of the departments are focusing on hiring bonuses, so anywhere from $2,500 to $10,000 per candidate that their departments are paying over and over. And I think amongst the city and amongst our discussion, a lot of us felt that there's got to be a more thoughtful way to approach this in a way that also keeps the staff that we have. I know we talked about this in the work session, but the law enforcement profession has changed. Used to be that you would lose seniority, you'd lose financial security by going to being on another probationary officer, taking a pay cut if anybody were to leave an agency they were in. And a lot of that has changed in government now. Officers can look at another department, any place they've considered working, and go there with taking almost very little risk and no pay cut, potentially getting a hiring bonus. And with the lack of candidates, the departments are turning into the haves and have-nots. I know philosophically we've talked about, as a city, trying to be a good place to work, and we're never going to pay the highest. I think if our hope has been to try and stay in the ballpark of what other agencies are doing in our area, but how do we really be a little bit better and more intentional? And so, as opposed to taking one of the approaches that we see there, and these are a summary of just ones that I've taken off of current postings. Right now there's 146 job postings on the Post website. And, that's kind of drives home what are we going to do as a city to keep the staff that we have and still be an attractive place to work for new staff. So if you can move on to the next slide for me, Jess. In March of 2022, I reached out to all of our police officers and we asked them what would be valuable to you as a recruitment or retention tool or idea for the city to consider. We summarized those, brought them before the council in June of 2023, seeking some direction, saying, hey, which of these would you be willing to consider? And at the time, the direction from the council is we need a little bit more detail as to what these would mean budgetarily, but also helping to understand how the officers value them, in a competitive way. So we formed a subcommittee on how to survey the officers to get the data in a meaningful way for the council. And so thank you, Councilor Nichols and Councilor Bottoма, for helping put together the survey, get the data in a way that can kind of help us ascertain what that carrying cost per benefit point was. So during the time of that subcommittee, we dialed in the financial numbers a little bit tighter on what the carrying costs for different options were, and also surveyed the officers to find out what carries the most value or bang for the buck on the city's behalf.
You missed the part about Democrats nationally and in Minnesota treating cops like shit, leading to police shortages.
Sure, I'll leave you guys to discuss the politics. And
That should be on there too.
I'm going to work with whoever's in office at the time. So that information was brought back to the council on January 2023, on January 12th of this year. So if you can go to the next slide. Again, we don't need to rehash this. It's really to kind of bring people along for the journey, but we saw which one scored the highest benefit points, had the most number of selections, and then looked at what the average score was by the selector. And then we also were able to kind of, with those numbers and looking at the carrying cost, kind of decide what that carrying cost per benefit point was. So based on the feedback from the council, staff's recommendation was to look at those, or based on the analysis points that the council wanted to consider, the staff recommended those top three ones that were green across the board, being the paid sabbatical, the vacation reimbursement, and the additional retirement health insurance contributions. There was some really good discussion amongst the council about what do we want these to look like, with them brought back and understanding what the rollout would look like. So some of that was talking about the formula for what a health insurance severance payment would look like, and how to structure that in a way that made sense. What would a sabbatical timeline look like? And what would the mechanics of these really look like if we were going to adopt them? So the takeaway on the staff end was bring these back in a way that for the council to be able to take action on them, and what would that structure look like? So staff worked with we obviously had internal discussions, looked at how they aligned with the budget. I think in the last one, it was discussed that the preference from the council, we were going to consider a wellness travel or retreat reimbursement, that be looked at in the first year, which would be this year of 2023. From a staff perspective, we think that a phased rollout would be beneficial, that we continue to try and gain ground on this topic. Looking at the mental health sabbatical in 2024, right now, Painesville, Minnesota is doing a mental health sabbatical. I'm not aware of other ones that haven't implemented yet. It's being talked about by several. It is one of the recommended strategies from a mental health provider. And then the health insurance severance payment. And that was really rooted in how do we try and keep people here for their whole career. If they're looking to go somewhere else and get a $10,000 signing bonus, what are they giving up by leaving here? We developed some handbook language on what each one of those could look like. We have the phasing plan in place. Again, I talked about the budget, which is the next slide, please, Jess. Again, the wellness travel and retreat reimbursement would have a liability of $18,000 in 2023 if adopted as proposed. The mental health sabbatical numbers that we had looked at were about $20,000 a year and a carrying cost for that. And then the health insurance severance payment really is looking at funding a fund to, I guess, keep up with those payments. And I have some numbers in the packet here that would show that I think funding that at $20,000 a year to start would be appropriate. It could be dialed back depending on whether or not growth happens. I think that $20,000 a year funding would allow addition of 1, 2, 3 other officers and still keep that account in the black where we would want it to be. If those additions didn't happen, the city could consider reducing that funding, I think, and reducing that liability going forward. You can go on to the next slide, please. One of the things that we had talked about but hadn't vetted the numbers on with the health insurance severance payment was based on how it's laid out as a formula. You can't assume all of that liability can't occur at once. It's going to inevitably be spread out. So what the schedule shows is when those liabilities would hit if the city did decide to adopt it, and what that running fund balance would look like. So on the right-hand side, you'd see if the city funded it at $20,000 a year beginning in 2025, 2 officers would be eligible right away, and it could go negative 23,000, but it quickly pulls back out. Now, I would suspect that one of those officers probably isn't going to be leaving that soon. That liability might wait till the next year. If any of those, this table assumes an officer taking the benefit at the earliest possible date. So this is kind of a most immediate, the soonest that we could incur this liability. But as you see, other than those 2 officers that become eligible upon adoption as presented, no one else is eligible for it until 2031, in which time 1 officer would be available, or would be eligible, 2032, 2 would be eligible, and so on. So this really does get spread out over a very long period of time. And, we ran some different numbers, wanted the council to be able to see if we were to consider looking back for months of service credit. Doing a 10-year look back is what staff is recommending to create that incentive to, really it has the biggest impact on our most senior employees to get them to stick around till 2025. And generate that value there to keep our current staff. You can see that in the numbers farther down in later years, those would essentially be younger officers since they wouldn't become eligible till later years. It has the shorter look back periods have some impact, but not quite as much as there is up front. So there's if you want to go on to the next slide. I think it'd be good to have a little bit of discussion here, some feedback from the council on the handbook language that was drafted. There's a couple of things that were highlighted in there that obviously all of the language is up for discussion, but what would be an appropriate clawback period if a person uses a travel retreat reimbursement and then leaves employment with the city? Should the city recoup some of that from a severance paycheck? Same discussion could be had as it relates to a sabbatical. But also is the 10-year look back for the health insurance severance payment, if the council elects to move forward with it, the appropriate time frame to look at? Would something longer or shorter be preferred? And really just looking to hear what your thoughts are on what was presented to you. So I guess the staff recommendation would be, I think after weighing it out, we drafted what we think would be our preferred language. I think it would be in our best interest to do all three of them. I'll let you know that the city's approach and discussion of this topic has gained a lot of attention from neighboring communities. I have a standing request from at least 5 or 6 police chiefs wanting a copy of everything that we've done and what we're doing, because they're feeling the same pinch that we are.
Is it in our interest to share that with them?
Yeah.
Well, it's all public documents, so I think they're gonna find out eventually. I think you're gonna see some cities that are just going to, do what we did and then just try and do it better, or, take the same solution. I think it would behoove them to do a process similar to what we did, because I think the council's vision on what really matters is a lot more thoughtful approach. You see a lot of these agencies that are giving $5,000 and $10,000 signing bonuses. That's going to be well more than $20,000 a year, or, even in similar agencies to our size. This year we have 2 positions that were added, had potentially 2 officers that were considering going to other agencies, and even at a $5,000 signing bonus just to try and refill them. You've now spent $20,000 and done nothing for the staff that have stayed. So I think that this is a really thoughtful approach. I think it's a more calculated approach as well. And talking to the agencies, as you saw on that list, they're almost all doing the same thing. And when you talk to them, they're saying, yeah, it got some attention at first, but it's not really having the intended purpose. It's not making them more competitive as they thought it would, because now everybody's doing it.
Do we have any idea of what we could do to bring people into the law enforcement community?
I mentioned.
What a lot of agencies are doing is you're seeing it, and the larger agencies have a benefit here of being able to support that, but they're actually connecting with youth in high school. They're paying for their college, and they're employing them as, whether it's mowing lawns or field maintenance, and they're employing them in other areas throughout the city, or community service officers. That's been the trend for people who might be a few years older. A lot of agencies have pathways to policing where they take people with a degree in anything and then create what their pathway is to get there. But it usually involves several years of paying for that candidate's education and kind of getting
paying for the
involved.
post-board education and all that.
Yep, and then, in a perfect world, that all works out, but it's really how long do they keep them? And, some of those people still move on to another agency, or they've invested 2 or 3 years and find out that either the person doesn't have their heart in the job, or they get there and realize it's not for them. So there's a good amount of risk there. I think if you're a larger agency like a Maple Grove or Plymouth, you can afford to take that risk on a handful of candidates. I think that's harder here. But to your question, it goes a lot broader than that. So that question's obviously been talked about amongst higher education and the profession as a whole, and even the several of the, on both sides of the aisle in the legislature, both state and federal representatives have talked about how do we get people interested in this. Some of it is focusing on just what the public perception of it is. If you look at model campaigns, you look at how many years the military had, a public campaign that made people want to join and created that higher calling, higher purpose. And there's also looks at benefits. There's been people floating ideas of saying, do you make retirees from law enforcement eligible for Medicare at an earlier age? Or what can we create as an incentive? And I think nobody has a firm answer yet, but it's definitely it's definitely a struggle across the entire country. We're not unique in Minnesota. I think we're feeling the pinch a lot harder in Minnesota, just because a lot of the more recent high-profile events have come from our state. So I think we're actually seeing people leave Minnesota as a whole to work in other states, as opposed to, in the past, people would come to work in Minnesota because of its higher standards, a little bit higher quality of life, and I think a little bit, at the time, better benefits than other states.
And great weather.
Yeah.
And a political class that backed them.
Yeah, we're seeing, when we go to recruitment events, so we're trying to make sure we have our name out there, but when we've been to Alexandria, we were at Hennepin Tech, And Las Vegas Metro PD is there, departments out of Arizona are there. We're having other states come to Minnesota to recruit our handful of graduates that come from these programs. And as we look at the hundreds of officers needed in Minneapolis and St. Paul, we don't begin to even fill those needs, let alone the rest of the state. So right now, I think there are other departments and other chiefs that I talk to, departments of nine officers that are staffed at 5. There's a lot of them that are half staff, I'd say. And by a lot, I mean, there's probably a dozen departments in the state that have half the officers that they're authorized for, just because they can't find people. On one of the earlier slides, it showed that there had been, I think, 17 police departments, or was it 14 police departments since 2017 that have just closed up shop. A lot of them have contracted with the county. They're having a hard time putting people in the driver's seat. So I think that I think if the council was willing to consider all 3 of these items, I think it would be a substantial benefit for our community. I think it would help us, I do believe it would help us try and keep more cops, and I think it would make us, it would send the message that this city supports their police officers, which is really what a lot of the job seekers are looking for right now. We're seeing that the $10,000 isn't putting drivers behind the wheel. They're looking for cities that are going to support them, and I think this also helps support our current officers. So I think this was a good approach.
Any questions?
Yeah, I've got something probably not associated with this, but I'm gonna ask anyhow, Matt. Have we ever explored that county support? And what I mean by that is us being Hanover's first call for police, Birchfield, Rockford, local communities that have farmed out this service to the county and stuff like that. Is that something we can do? Is that something that you've thought of, or am I, that's above and beyond this. I'm thinking, if we grow that way and we take on a little bit bigger footprint, is there stuff there? I'm all in favor of this stuff right now, but
Yeah,
think it outside the box on something.
no, that's a really good thought. So we don't actively solicit our services to other communities, but we have been asked by communities surrounding us to say, hey, what would it cost?
Yeah.
Usually those conversations are in the context of their contract is up with their service provider, and they're looking to try and shave, $5,000 or $10,000 off here or there. And I've been able to tell them at a high level, number one, I'm not going to give you numbers unless you formally request them. Because
Right.
we're not gonna do under the table passing notes or numbers. I said, as a city, we'd be happy to provide that number, and we'd want council authorization. But I usually tell them, I can say with some confidence that we're not going to be cheaper than what your current service provider is. However, I believe we can probably do a better job as it relates to community interaction, community support, and some of the things that you guys see as our department strengths. I know that we could provide that. And kind of left the conversation at that. And none of the communities have reached out with a formal
Okay.
request for information. I think there are times that they've asked the question, they were looking to try and save money. And when you look at the option of doing that, I recognize that if we're to do that, it can't come at the expense of service to our current Corcoran residents. And when you look at how truly expensive it is for public safety, whether it's police or fire, it's hard to start up. And when you look at the staffing and equipment that it would take to provide service to another community, not at the cost of our current residents, that's substantial.
Focus on us right now is what you're saying.
Yeah, and I
Right.
think if another community wanted to partner with us, I think it'd be worth the city entertaining.
Okay.
Can I ask a
Yeah.
question? So, the 3 recommended, you have a time frame of rollout. Is there a rhyme or reason what order they're in?
So I think part of what I had heard at the last meeting was, I think it was Counselor Nichols that suggested we look at the travel reimbursement first. And I think part of that was rooted in, it fits within what was budgeted for this year, as all 3 of them would. But I think that was maybe one of the, it doesn't require as long-term of a rollout, whereas the sabbaticals will require scheduling and a phasing to kind of get there. That would give us a little bit of time if we were to not start scheduling the sabbaticals till 2024 or 2025. It gives us time. Our hope would be that we're scheduling those sabbaticals a year in advance so that the officers have the appropriate time to prepare for it, but also on staffing on our end, that we're phasing it, not during significant events, not overlapping time periods between the officers. So I think it was, for the sabbaticals, it was really focused on being able to plan. The health insurance severance payment, as you saw, we have 2 officers that upon adoption, if that formula were adopted, would become eligible immediately. And our hope would be that those 2 officers might want to stick around for another couple of years to wait until 2025 when that plan goes into effect. So that was kind of the logic behind it. Now, the accruals that's presented in the health insurance severance payment is proposing a 10-year look back from January of this year. So even if it were adopted some different look back or no look back, we would still, if it was adopted this year, they would still be getting accruals until the eligible payout, which, if adopted as proposed, would not be eligible until 2025. So that was the logic that we had, and certainly open to council had different ideas or thoughts.
No, I appreciate you sharing that logic because it makes sense in that regard with regards to the health insurance severance payment, pushing back. Because at first glance, I think sabbatical is the hardest one of the 3 to swallow.
Yeah.
But when you put it in that context, it could buy us 2 more years of somebody.
I support all of them. I think in your question about the look-back period, I would support the staff recommendation with the 10-year for that, just to, the value of the incentive is going to come from the value of the incentive. So if we want to make sure that we are effective in our intended purpose, we need to make sure that we're investing there where it makes sense. In terms of the repayment period, I thought the 3 months was reasonable. I'd be open to 6 also. But 3 seemed like it would meet the intent.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and our hope was really, I think, to have to exercise that as little as possible. And I think where the concern arose is if a person, our intent is to prevent the malicious use of it, that somebody has decided they're leaving, use it, and then separating. But sometimes that's not always the circumstance. If there's a negative life circumstance, if, you know, a spouse has a diagnosis or something's happening in a family structure and somebody's forced to leave, it's a really poor situation to be in as a city that they've experienced a negative circumstance in their life, and now the city's saying, remember that trip to Disney World 5 months ago, you have to give that money back.
Yeah.
I think that's where we felt that 3 months seemed like a good balance. But as you start talking about the volume, if there is that rollover, you can start talking about a fair amount of money, which theoretically they could have used years prior but waited. You know, that's the tough balance. Where's the appropriate amount? And I think where I landed at was, I think 3 months is enough to meet that, but keep it from being used maliciously, where 6 months, a lot can happen in that time.
Mm-hmm.
I think 3 months works.
To that point, and you might have said it, my sabbatical starts tomorrow, and all of a sudden there's a life event at day 25 after that 21-day sabbatical. You're saying pay that back?
So the sabbatical has a requirement that you stay employed with the city for 6 months, the sabbatical. And if that doesn't happen, what's written in there is that PTO would be used for that leave period. So for a 21-day sabbatical,
All right.
yep, it would be 3 weeks worth of work for the officer.
And then these 21, I'm reading it right now. 21 days are consecutive, they can't be broken out. It's a full-blown leave period. So,
21 calendar days, yep.
yep.
There is a requirement in there as well that they meet with our contracted psychologists where they talk about what they're planning to do, how they're planning to support their mind, body, and spirit during that leave. As it's written, it would be at the city's expense, which are typical, we do our annual required checkups for our officers. It would fall somewhere in that range. So when I spoke to our contracted mental health provider, she thought it would probably be in that $120 to $150 range for that officer to have that meeting to discuss what their wellness plan was during their leave. Now, that would be private between them and their provider. We wouldn't see it, wouldn't approve it, wouldn't have any impact with it, but unless the officer chose to share that.
Okay. Dean's reading, any questions? Any other questions on that?
So we put a lot of time into this, and I'm really happy what we came up with, and I hope it makes a difference. And I'll say it's really unfortunate that what's happened in the field, and I am not a Republican. I don't get invited to their stuff. I say it as a city council person trying to attract police officers and trying to keep our city safe. We have so few people that want to get into that industry because it's been demonized by a big portion of the left side of the aisle in America, and it sucks. And I hope this makes a difference.
Yeah, well said. Okay, I'll make a motion to adopt the handbook language and rollouts, all of the language as presented.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Good job, guys. Good job, Matt.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Okay, 10D, cropland weed control.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. We are, in front of us tonight is just sort of a continuation of some discussion that we had earlier this year related to some of the properties that the city has. In 2022, the county reevaluated how they taxed leased land, where they had a reinterpretation of how they did that. As a result, the renter of our city land was taxed for personal property taxes under state statute. And so we are looking at some options to explore weed control for the two parcels that the city owns. As we don't want to be out of compliance with our own city ordinances for nuisances, we think it's a good idea to start planning for that. So we have a couple options. I did have a conversation today with the city assessor office, who is the one who worked through the personal property tax versus payment in lieu of taxes issue with us earlier this year. And the way that statute reads, they believe if we were to do a service contract and to allow someone to put hay down, and if they feed the hay to horses or feed it to cows and those cows are sold, that constitutes making a profit off the land. That is their interpretation of the way the statute reads. And so we'd have to have a very narrow service contract, and they didn't think that was something that it would likely, there'd be some sort of profit somehow from someone doing the service contract. So it's likely not a great option. The next option that staff would probably.
Just when you say they, who are you?
The
County assessor.
Hennepin County Assessor's Office.
They said what?
That if there is any profit made off of our land, that they have to assess taxes to the
To that
renter,
farmer, to that
whoever's
person using.
it. Now, they did say, they worked with the city of Dayton recently to do the second option here, which is they rent the land, the city pays the taxes on the land. And it's the cost of maintaining the land. So we could set up a rental program like we did before and just pay the cost of the rental, or the taxes, and see what we can get for rent, but know that we're gonna have to pay the property taxes on that. Seems to, it's a fairly cost effective means if we can make that happen. Other ways, we could look at spraying and mowing, and/or repurposing it to a community garden. I don't know that we'd be able to do that for this year or even next year, because we'd want to have some planning and funding in place in order to do that.
That last one was more of an idea that Commissioner Brumman brought up, and it's mentioned in there, but interesting long-term thought.
But if the assessor makes the stretch that if you raise hay, feed cattle with it, and sell the cattle for profit, it becomes a profit, you could make the same leap argument that a community garden could be used to raise vegetables, and people could sell those vegetables to make a profit.
True.
I mean, it's the dumbest logic I've ever heard.
But I could see how they make that
They
leap. yeah.
quoted the state statute, which does say if you're making a.
So what happens
profit.
if that hay sits and molds and becomes of no value? They're not gonna give you
Take a
a
loss.
rebate.
I mean, that is something that we could look at potentially doing. We don't want to.
I don't,
Well,
I
what's
don't,
it-
Can the
What's
city
the-
make a profit off that land?
No, no.
I don't sell my horses, I'll come get the hay and
What if we bought a
I'll
bunch of goats?
transact.
Could we fence it and have
We
goats
talked
maintain
about
it?
good.
Well, this is direction and create, we're just trying to, there's a lot of pieces to this, but doing nothing is gonna default into probably the most expensive, right? Because
what about these green spaces and stuff that we talk about and limited, Kendra, what do you call it? So we don't have to mow yards and
There
those
was
kind of
this
things,
one.
what do we call
A
it?
bee yard.
The native landscape?
Native landscapes and stuff
think
like
that
that,
was
can we
something
turn that
you and I
into with
discussed.
some general work initially and
That's what
then
I'm
it
doing at my house.
I think the main
Very
issue there
restful.
was the amount of time it takes for that to,
takes some time?
and the overall cost to do it.
Well, it's
Yeah, I
initial
think-
startup cost,
Right.
right? And then
yeah,
there's a
and
maintenance
there's,
cost.
yeah, so it's like a heavy investment.
I will tell you
cost.
exactly how much it costs, because I'm doing that at my house.
That would actually be interesting to know.
I mean,
Depends on the kind of flower you want.
Right.
well, and does it have to be a flower, right? 'Cause
Usually-
you look at- you
Or
look-
grassland.
Yeah.
I'm sorry not to cut you off, but you look at, what the hell's the development just south of your house, sorry?
Well,
Meadows?
Yes, they
Right.
do it in their
Yep.
natural landscape environment, and you
Mhm.
control burns to maintain
Mhm.
weeds and stuff, but.
Right.
Or you mow it.
I'm not too hip on mowing, and in fact.
No, when you
mowing-
plant native prairie grass and wildflowers, you
Then
mow
mow.
it. You do a release. It's the
So
same
it
as
spreads
mowing.
it.
Okay.
No, you allow the sunlight to penetrate towards the ground. You can't burn it right away. You gotta wait
Gotcha.
a couple of years.
I'd be, of these options, the only one that sits out to me right now is that we ended a 2-year rental agreement with somebody a year early. And it would be nice if we could honor the second year. But that's at a cost, an estimated cost of $8,000, and I think long-term, we gotta think of something cheaper, and that's what I'm like.
Yeah.
what's-
Did the county
fencing in,
zap
throw a bunch
that
of goats on it.
person tax?
No, we ended up paying
We
it.
ended
But what's
up
the
paying-
tax on it?
It's the
15,000?
personal property tax, and it was about $15,000.
So they rented the land from
We
us.
rented they rented the land and paid us approximately $7,000. And then what we used to do is pay 30% of that rental cost. And we paid a small tax on it, so it just reduced our overall
Paid a small
revenue.
tax to the county.
Yeah. we
Yeah, and they
paid
changed their
30%,
interpretation of that
but then they
statute.
But then they reevaluated how this, and we're not the only property in
County.
the county that has reviewed this and that is looking at this. But they changed it, or the reinterpretation said that it was making a profit off the land and that and they needed to pay the personal property tax. How that's calculated,
Yeah.
I don't know. We'd have to talk to the county.
I
So
do
did-
have a dinner with the county assessor next, in a week and a half, so I could
So
raise these
a
issues.
farmer can rent from another person.
another farm
Yeah.
landowner, do they go through the same issue?
Do they go through the same issue? Are they taxed on, and then is the farmer that's renting the land to another farmer, is he taxed on that rent?
That's not how we work.
Careful,
Sure
the
you
can of
know how
worms
to
are
do
about
it,
to
Jude.
open. with
Yeah,
that.
if you give me just a second, I can pull
I'm
up
I'm
the statute
thinking of
for us.
some,
Don't give them any ideas.
Yeah.
I'm
The
thinking of
logic just
some,
doesn't make sense.
No. it
Yeah,
doesn't.
so you have a piece of property, so how many acres is taxed at 15,000, the tax on it is $15,000?
It's the profit that they made
Make
off
off
of
of
the
it,
land.
yeah.
It's not necessarily the acreage.
Well, they should be
Oh,
paying
wait a
income
minute.
tax on
Yeah,
it.
that's a different
That's-
thing. That's not
yeah, it's
property
really
tax, that's income tax.
It's under state statute, it's
Hilt.
personal property. Yeah, personal property. If you give me just one moment, I can pull up the state statute.
Because,
Oh, I do have that. It
Do
is
it.
state statute
It
two
states,
seven.
yeah, it states
Where is it?
here,
so if you rent pasture land,
And-
put cows or horses on
when we look
it, that generates poop.
at,
I gotta
Minnesota
calculate how much
statute.
poop costs.
Minnesota
profit
statute
because it's fertilizer.
272.01.
Plus the-
When
I'm
any-
sorry, it doesn't cost a thing to listen to me, guys, so
272,
I'm
yeah,
glad
it
you're
does,
getting
it
cheap
costs
laughs out of it.
0.01.
3,600 a year.
Yeah, so.
I just,
Go ahead, Jess.
Yeah, so
Get
it's
'em
all
moving.
about it's all about when any real or personal property tax, which is exempt, this is what gets us is.
We're
tax
exempt.
Tax exempt.
Never mind.
Because
Now
of the
I'm-
tax exemption, it says that if it's leased, loaned, or otherwise made available for any private individual, association, or corporation in connection with business conducted for profit, there shall be an imposed tax for the privilege of using such real or personal property in the same amount to the extent as though the leasee or user would be the owner of such property. So
we
it
can't-
We could build a
basically
public
changes it to
pedestrian ramp.
taxable land.
and we can't just let a farmer come and work it, get the crops go away without charging them a dime?
No, because they would say.
Then
that
we'd
they're
have all the
making-
farmers
They're
wanting-
making, well, if they go do anything with that's selling it, it makes the taxes go.
How do they determine the valuation of the tax of that?
So I think the way it
It's
says
corn,
is to the
it's-
same amount as though the leasee
How much
or
of-
it was the owner of
Yeah.
real property.
Beans,
So
how
it
much of-
changes the property to if it was a real, like, not tax exempt. So they look at it,
So it is based on the value.
it's based on the value of the property, but just
Not what's done with
not what's done with it. So.
They just don't want people to get, like, farmers to get sweetheart leases from their local government agency or their local government, and then that can lend itself to corrupt practices.
Yeah.
And I can see how why you'd want that, because
Yeah.
the economics are so much better if you can rent from a government entity that pays no tax on their land. It drives rent prices way down.
Yeah. I don't know if I give them that much credit for really being on top of that, or if they're just,
I think our prices are driven down by the fact there's so few farmers in the area.
Well, that too.
To rent from.
But like, if you could justify it as a farmer paying taxes on your rented land if corn was at $7 a bushel. It could be justified, just like you owned it. I don't know. That sucks.
Yeah.
So all that's true, so what do we do?
So I think we'd recommend our best
Rental.
option is probably going out for rental, just because of the time that it would take and the upfront costs for making it prairie. Unless
Going
that's
out for
something that
rental, what does
council-
that mean?
essentially doing what we did, but just
We
eating the
go out
cost.
and bid and ask who wants to give us how much money they'd be willing to give us to use the land. for
And then
their
they know
crops.
they're gonna get
And then
taxed.
we would take on the taxes. Because I don't think that we're gonna get anyone who wants to pay 15,000, pay us and pay the taxes. So it's, unfortunately, it's a significant cost to us. I think it's a better
How many acres is it?
49,
49 between the
Oh.
two
two.
properties total.
Because it's the property to the north as well as the property connected to City Park.
We could plan it, and you and I could mow it. It'd only take 8 hours every 3 weeks.
What if we got a donation for goats? And then-
We don't want goats.
And then they raised the goats, and then we donated the meat back to some charity at the end of the year. There'd be no profit.
Perfect plan.
I think we should build an airport runway.
Public Works out there chasing goats around.
There's an exception in the law of if it's an airport runway.
Really?
Yes.
With Matt directed
I,
now.
I want to put forth, I want to put an airport runway.
Right next to
on
the bus
both-
stop?
On both properties.
About helicopter pads. Thanks
I
for
think
a bus
it's
stop.
in there,
We could certainly.
airport
look at-
runway exemption.
We could look at
exception.
it.
It is in there, but I
Those are
don't,
all good long-term ideas. What are we gonna do in the next 2 years? I appreciate the great.
We can have a grass airstrip.
Yeah.
So,
Need to be mowed.
I think the rental's probably the best short-term option, unfortunately.
and we could start as we're looking at the budget, maybe set aside some funds
Many
to
acres?
make a plan.
49.
why is the rental a better option when, 3,000 per application?
Well,
Yeah.
If you
we based
mow
it
it?
off of the one time we had to do the St. Therese property, just due to some timing. That's what it cost to outsource. It was $2,000 a year and a half ago.
And the cost for fertilizer, or.
Oh my
the
God.
spray is
Significant
gone
cost to do that, and so really, the rental options really were offsetting that.
You had to
We're
fertilize
actually
for that.
probably better off to do that and pay the
$300
taxes
an
than we are
acre
just
to
to maintain
plant
it.
corn.
Some of the long-term thoughts about why maybe future land use plays into this, right? So 2 of these are at City Park. So we wouldn't want to invest in like native grass if it weren't going to stay native grass for a long time because it's expensive and then you still have maintenance that slowly fades away. If we were going to put it perpetually into open space, then it would make sense to commit to that sooner than later, but I don't know that we're in a position for this year to know that. But if there's, I don't think City Park we'd want to put in forever probably, but maybe the area north here, we would consider that. That's kind of an area where it's lowland, maybe a wetland bank area. So it's got future uses that we don't know yet, so I wouldn't probably recommend committing to an expensive seed mix, knowing, unless we're gonna commit to a long year plan where it's gonna stay that way. So that's the challenges of those long-term plays, so I think we'd probably, staff would recommend another 2-year, I think we basically expired or canceled our previous agreements. I don't know that we could just go back and honor that specific term. We'd have to rebid it. Probably recommendation would be for 2 years, and then we'd have a condition that just said whatever taxes are, you'd submit them to the city and we'd pay it and try to budget for it. And then that way it's offset to half of what we might pay for just straight up maintenance. So it's really our maintenance plan, our less expensive maintenance plan for 2 years, and then we would recommend figuring out what we want to do beyond that with the property. And that will take land use conversations, that would take what interpretation from this county they would do in terms of these programs. We wouldn't necessarily want to build a program and use public works guys to run it, right? Would it be a park and rec program? Maybe there's funding, there is grant funding, through agencies if we're gonna convert like the wetland area perpetually, right? We could go to the US Wildlife and get grants for seed that we could plant in 2 years. I think we could work on that, there's programs out there, but we just have to agree that we're committing it for a long period of time to make that a viable plan. So I think we'll wanna keep on this to figure out our long-term plan, but I don't think we really could implement something really in less than 2 years. And the reason why we would not just do a year-to-year contract is because the farmers that, from our experience, won't really invest in the land if they don't have a 2-year commitment. They won't fertilize it, they won't take care of it, so it incentivizes them to keep the weeds down if they have a 2-year deal, because they're making investments at their own expense. So we're kind of thinking, I know this is a direction conversation, but we're thinking we want a 2-year temporary commitment with a direction to pursue a long-range plan, and whatever that looks like, I guess is.
I'll do it for $3,000 this whole summer. 49 acres, serious, 100% serious.
Yeah, I mean, we're just trying to address the short-term maintenance.
That's
so
a
I don't-
short term, 3 times. I can't imagine paying $8,000 to have some, I did 49 acres or 45 acres last summer, same thing, mowed grass. All summer long. My son did it, it takes 20 hours to do it. It does not take $9,000 to mow 49 acres 3 times a year. And I say that because I did it last summer. Same thing, old farm field. We're not doing ditches, we're not doing ponds.
No trees around it,
No.
just wide open, just,
Yeah, I mean, I think if we had a scenario where we had a
Problem.
volunteer, I don't even know if that
Yeah,
would,
we-
if we have
we have-
someone that will do it for a minimal, I mean, those are all the creative options.
I know I can't do, I know I'm on council and everything, but I can't believe that we'd pay $8,000 to have someone do that.
We
That's why
could
we're,
look-
that's what we're trying to avoid to do, but I mean, those are real.
Put it out for bid, public bid.
Just to,
to-
yeah, that's what I'm
just to mow
saying,
it,
but
we could look at
And then
that.
if we just hate the prices, then we could look at the
I
rental.
think, I think it's more expensive than we realize, and I think your son's time, other people might value it. We'd have to go, out if that's the direction, we can go.
I'm
out
just
that
telling you,
way.
I did 45 acres last summer, mowed it 3 times. I did exactly what and there's no way I would charge the city $9,000 to do that. That's
Does
crazy.
it need to get planted?
No. You
It's
just,
just
it's
not, you
weed
just
control.
knock it down. Yeah, if you're
Weed
not,
control
yeah, in
is
that
it.
scenario, you're just mowing to knock the things down so they don't go to seed.
you'd need to disc and do
No, you
some
don't need to
preparation.
do that. No, it's purely for noxious weed control,
Yeah, but-
right?
Well,
For where it's at right now, they chisel plowed, you gotta level that out.
yeah,
or
it
you're gonna
depends
tear
on
yourself up.
expectations a little bit, but yes, you could
Well, they
let, you
chisel
could
plow.
let
Yeah,
invasives grow, but we'll get a lot of calls, cause people see invasives growing, you know. It's, in our community, it's very much, we get notified when there's weeds. So it's, you know, and as a city, we'll get calls to make sure that we're keeping that down, so. Yeah, I think that's exactly our point. We don't wanna waste money on just mowing grass. And so if we had a volunteer that could do it, great. It's not, you know, appreciate that, but when we publicly go out there, there's not a lot of people volunteering their time. That's,
I'm not saying I volunteer. I'm saying it shouldn't cost the city $8,000 to do it. It won't. If you bid it out, I'll do it for $3,000.
How long will it take to go through the bidding process?
The bidding process, we just need to put it in the paper for a couple weeks.
yes, yeah, we just have to draft up a document, kind of lay out expectations, cause we have.
same 3 farmers have bid on it for how many years, are they gonna wanna bid on it again?
Just to mow it, I mean, I think we get interest in the air, in where it was maintenance service contract where they could use it for horses, then you'd get it. low.
Is it really chisel plowed?
Yeah, it's,
Oh, gosh.
What's our long-term available uses for that land? It's low, so we can't really even build anything on it, right?
Well, if you look at our park plan, it does have those areas being converted to different uses, yes.
I think-
The 2 fields that, there's that one field west of on the Rockfield property and the other one that's.
No, I'm talking about the property
Up
up here.
here?
Yeah.
It's a low-lying area, so it could be coordinated with a future development to mitigate floodplain. It could be looked at to evaluate a wetland bank restoration where we could potentially convert it to credits. We'd have to review that. There's a lot of agencies involved, but it could be potentially converted into a wetland bank that we just keep. You could convert it to just an open space park or something, you know, and so there's endless options there.
We
When you
still have
make
now
a
it-
capital investment, you wanna commit to a certain time.
It'll cost $2,000 to disc the chisel plow field. So then now my numbers aren't gonna be.
$5,000,
I-
up to 5 right now.
I think these are more, I mean, this has got a little variability. If we had a generous person that wanted to half volunteer, half cover their expenses, it might come down, but I don't know if that's gonna come down too much lower than the 8,000 that we might get in the rent, that we've seen for rentals. And we might not even get that anymore, cause,
Yeah.
you know,
You're probably right.
we just need some direction because otherwise we're gonna be mowing and it's gonna cost probably more.
We're gonna need to buy mowers, I mean,
Yeah,
Cost
I mean, we don't have that, and it's a fair amount of time just going back and forth on that. So
And I think
it's a
that's,
significant effort that we don't wanna default to.
I think we need to figure out a way to change it from a cost generator to an income generator. as quickly as possible. Get
I
to,
think they're past that point now.
no, I mean, the wetland bank thing. if that's
There's
something we
a
can
significant amount of
actually
money in wetland.
So that might be,
Selling it
let's do
off
a
for-
2-year interim
Yeah.
plan with a goal of evaluating what, and we can bring back some idea. This is kind of just really to get some direction on the short-term plan, because that's our urgent decision, and then ideas for a long-term plan. We don't want to even the short-term plan every year ideally. That's kind of the default because of where we're at. And we think it's cheaper than just mowing it.
I'll make a motion to direct staff to go the rental route for what is only, can only be described as the least crappy option for now. And then work with council to develop a long-term plan for the site.
I'll second that. It's a 2-year plan, you're saying?
Yeah,
We'd like get it.
I'm getting a look from Dean.
I'd like to make it friendly,
Yeah,
what do we call it?
amendment.
Amendment. 2 years with options of 3, so we don't have to go through the bidding process again, you know what I mean?
Sure.
Oh, we could do it.
For the
We could do a
same person.
2 and 3 year, we do that, and if someone.
I'm just saying,
Yeah,
a
that-
2-year with options on 3, if we don't have a solution in 2
Yeah,
years,
that's-
it just stays with the same farmer for the 3rd year. That's,
That's good with me. With you?
so we don't have to go through this again.
Okay.
I'd vote no on that.
Okay.
I wouldn't vote yes on the 2, though.
You,
We should be able to come up with a plan.
Just get it done in 2 years.
We should be able to come up with a plan in 2 years.
that's what you're saying.
I'll remove my friendly amendment.
If it's not chisel
That's
plowed,
okay.
it'll cost $3,000.
I know.
Okay, so let's go back to, we'll re-friendly amend that to the original 2 years.
Sorry about that.
Alan, is that good?
Yeah.
You don't have to, I'm only one vote.
No, it's a
No, I just,
fair point that it puts a timeline on us to try to get a long-term thing solved. So,
Yep.
okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Perfect.
Who thought that was gonna take 45 minutes?
That's why I can,
I knew that.
You did?
didn't you listen to
No.
Kevin's pointer last week?
Can I make a motion?
He's got
to,
over-unders everything on us.
Reappoint and thank Phil and Ken for their service to the city. 10
yes,
ENF,
you
please.
can. We have a second.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay.
You know, they're celebrating, popping the champagne at home right now, listening to us reappoint them.
Absolutely. All right. Staff reports, 11A, we have 3, right? A, B, and C?
Maybe. Thank you, Mayor and Council. We first have just our active planning applications report. If there are any questions, certainly let staff know. And then the next item that we have on our, in front of you today, we did go forward with a request for some bonding appropriation. And we received notice that we have a public hearing coming up. When we went forward with looking for bonding opportunities, at the time, we thought we would be able to convert that to part of our 2023 A bond and part of our current project. And we were informed that that wouldn't be available until at least 2024 or later, based on where the bonding cycle was.
Just takes longer than.
It just took longer than when we had been told about it. It just, the timing didn't work out quite correctly for us. So when we were informed this week about a opportunity for us to come in to do a public hearing, we wanted to amend the language to make sure we could utilize any funding that we requested for other projects that the city had and we're planning for. So what we're proposing to do is make some minor changes to change the area of service to be the entire municipal service area, and then look at, we've been planning for a second well in Northeast. We've been looking at the third cell of the water treatment facility. We could use we built the building but didn't put the insides in.
What?
Plumbing.
Just,
The third
built that
cell
Two
of it.
cells.
Oh, yeah.
Two
The
cells.
structure, but not the stuff.
That's why you're here. I hope it's been worth your time.
So it would give us the opportunity to get that paid for, as well as we've been looking at a booster station and water storage facility in Southeast in the long-range financial plan. So it would give us an opportunity to leverage state dollars to get some of those projects that we've been planning for in the water fund and get those done. So I think it would be a good idea. So we just wanted to get confirmation from council that you're comfortable with this. And then on Wednesday, Mayor McKee and myself would attend those Capitol, go and testify on behalf of our request.
How much?
$10 million.
$10 million.
Just 10 mil.
If they'll give us more, we'll ask for it.
We gladly take more. I
It
thought I
probably
was
won't
be.
give us the full amount.
No.
Yeah, I was thinking it was moonshot asking for 10. I was hoping for 5 to 7, but if they're,
Can we install water softening with that money?
No.
I,
Probably not, actually.
What are we, that soft? We can't go that soft that fast in this town. Literally and figuratively.
I think,
Can't do it and hook up to Maple Grove because they don't treat their water.
Can we have Perrier in our water tower, please?
that's a question for the engineers if we need to change any of
Is
the
it possible?
equipment. But this is just an opportunity. We didn't think, quite honestly, we were told that it's quite a long process, and so we didn't think that we would even get a hearing. So we're excited.
I got a
about
lot
the
of friends
opportunity.
down there. I'll go and talk.
Sounds
Let
good.
them know I think about other things.
Is that like a 3-day event or an hour?
We get 5 minutes on Wednesday.
Yeah.
Oh, good for you. That's awesome.
I did talk to Representative Nadeau today, and he said to let him know when we're heading down there, so we have at least one friend down there, or two. Representative Robbins as well.
Just excited about the opportunity to bring some more state dollars to the city and
Man,
Get some
good luck with that.
Yeah.
fingers
Go
crossed.
get them, guys.
Sounds good.
Thank you all. Sorry, the next item is just a update on Heckmore Road. We've been, the road project. So we have been working with the city of Medina over the last year and a half, multiple years, probably 3 years, since 2020, I recall correctly. But we've been working with them. We're finalizing agreements and looking to work with project partners on finalizing what the financial commitments look like, as well as what the total project is going to look like. So we hope to have some information in front of you and authorize bids at the next, authorize going out for bids at the next council meeting, and bringing after that a joint powers agreement in front of council.
And several other agreements.
And several other agreements with potential project partners along the corridor.
And just with the intention that, that Medina would likely be, because when you have joint powers, you have to choose one community to be the owner. So our intention at this point in the JPA would be that Medina would be the owner. That's how they've kind of managed the project to date with WSB as their primary engineer. So that was just a kind of a disclosure of what's coming, so.
That sounds great.
I think Pat and his crew did such a good job with the coal patches last week on it that we just leave it the way it is. Just another year, maybe.
See if it's all in one piece.
We do have some state funding that we want to utilize, and we've worked on some other funding.
What?
Yep, potentially county funding.
Gotcha.
County money, and we're just trying to leverage all of the opportunities we can and work with as many people as we can to make it a great project.
That sounds great. And yeah, I think that works perfectly with Medina taking the lead. Looking forward to getting that done.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. If nothing else, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. What are you getting the giggles about?
John's line about Perrier in the water tower.
I was still getting them.
Not Aquafina.
Recording stopped.
So are we
You want the bubble?
turning the water tower, is it green?
Yes,
Those are green?
see-through green.
But you know what Evian water spill backwards is?
So John, just so you know, Maple Grove had a work session about a month ago on doing water softening for their whole city.
They did.